Welcome back, everyone. Sorry for the long delay. We are once again back working on the Wes's Model Car Corner number 4 Zack Knowlden Modified. I like to batch paint all the metallic parts in one session, starting with the lightest color and working my way to the darker color. These can then be set aside. Switching back over to the chassis, we'll begin detail painting the front suspension and then assembling it. Next, we'll get the pedals and oil tank installed. I like to use green Zap-A-Gap for assembling painted parts. It's important to get these parts installed now while there's still room to work. A quick wash of Tamiya Black panel line accent color is added to bring out the details. With the silver dry on the front suspension, now we can pick out the various pieces using Tamiya Clear Yellow with some thinner added and some Tamiya Clear Red. I'm going to open up the holes in the front suspension slightly with my X-Acto knife. As well as on the upper A-arms. I'll begin by gluing the spindle to the lower A-arm, followed by the upper A-arm. It's important to notice there's two different kinds of hubs in this kit. The smooth hubcaps go on the front, and the hubs with the bolts go on the rear. The brake rotors are slid on first, followed by the hubs. Again, I'm using green Zap-A-Gap to hold these pieces together. It only takes a small amount to hold the hubs in place. A little fine-tuning is necessary to make sure everything lines up. Moving on to the rear suspension, I've got all the parts laid out here that I'll need. These are all pre-painted and ready for assembly. To begin, I like to glue the torque arm directly to the rear end. Once the glue is dried on these parts, I'll again add a Tamiya panel line wash. This helps bring out the molded in details. Notice there are two different lengths of rear axle tubes. The shorter one will go on the left, the longer one on the right. These are just simply glued into the rear end. Next, we'll add the two rear suspension coilover trailing arm pieces. I like to gently notch each of these so the rear end can sit down on them firmly. It'll also help raise the back of the car up so the tires aren't touching the fenders. There's two mounting points on the chassis where these connect on each side. Again, a small amount of green Zap-A-Gap will hold them in place. It's important to make sure these two are parallel with the frame rails of the car. Next, the right side piece is added, making sure again it is parallel to the frame. Make sure the glue is fully dried on these before adding the rear end. Next, we can add the rear end unit. I add a small amount of Zap-A-Gap to this pin on the interior that will help locate the whole rear end. Once it's fully secured, I'll add a small amount of glue to each of the spots on the rear end where they meet the trailing arms. Then the rear end simply drops onto the trailing arms. The final piece of the rear suspension to add is the panhard bar. Again, this hole is slightly enlarged and then it's installed into the chassis. To make it easier to install the rear hubs, we'll use 2 pieces of 1/16 inch styrene rod. Two pieces are cut and glued into the hubs. Add the brake rotor, and then these can be slid into the rear end. I begin assembling the basic engine pieces, again using green Zap-A-Gap. I varied from the kit instructions slightly by adding the transmission to the piece with the bell housing and motor plate. This is then aligned to the pins on the chassis and glued in place. It's a very tight fit getting the engine installed. It takes a little bit of maneuvering, but it will drop down into place. Make sure everything is seated firmly, and then add a bit of Zap-A-Gap to hold it all in place. Next up, the fuel cell is glued into place. I installed the drive shaft, and then finally the interior piece can be added. Next, I can add the seat, the shifter, and the electronics panel. Next, I'll add the steering wheel and steering shaft, followed by the upper roll cage bars. All the main body panels were clear coated and then polished. Next I can add the final decals over the top. After a quick soak in some warm water, I'll brush on some water and some blue microset. Using a soft brush, I slowly work out all the air bubbles and excess water. Once all the decals are applied, the body panels can be set aside and we can get started on the tires and wheels. I like to use a big flat file to help remove the center line as well as give them a rough texture. These look like they just came off the track. After sanding, I washed all 4 tires with some soapy water and sprayed the sidewalls with some Tamiya TS13 Clear. Next I can begin adding the tire decals. Again using microset and microsol. Once dry, I give them a coat of Mr. Super Clear Flat. Since the front tires are exposed on this car, there's Hoosier lettering on both sides of the front tires, but I only decaled the outside of the rear tires. To tone down the white lettering, I gently rub over some Tamiya weathering powder. Here you can see the difference between the clean white version and the toned down version. I found several pictures of Zack's car that had both black wheels or chrome wheels. I decided to go with the chrome wheels. I'm using the Wes's Model Car Corner accessories from the Showboater kit. We'll use the chrome wheels out of this. This is the white tree out of the normal kit, chrome plated. Again, I'll add a little wash to the inside of the wheel to help bring out the lug nuts. Now we can get to the really fun part, bringing all the sub-assemblies together during final assembly. I separated the coilovers from the upper suspension piece to make them easier to install. I'll begin by installing the radiator and the water lines. Again, just using small amounts of green Zap-A-Gap on a toothpick. Next, I'll add the suspension crossbar, followed by the two coilovers. With those in place, the front suspension is complete. Back in part 1, I had cut out the screen and the lower nose. To replace it, I'll be using a piece of mesh from a Tamiya kit. A quick dry brush with some chrome silver will add some depth. Once the mesh is trimmed to size, we can glue it to the backside of the nose using some Tester's Window Maker glue. It's a simple modification, but it really adds a lot of realism. Next, the nose can be installed to the chassis. Slide it over the frame horn and then snap it into place. With the nose pieces installed, we can add the lower sway bar arms. followed by the front bumper. To install the sides, I began by opening up all the mounting points with a drill bit. Then the doors can be installed, making sure they are firmly mounted to the chassis. Next, the roof can be installed. There's 4 tabs on the underside that line up with the roll bars. Very small amount of glue is needed here. Make sure the 4 pads directly line up with the roll bars. Next up, we'll get the headers installed. Again, just a small amount of Zap-A-Gap will lock these into place. Before gluing the Nerf bars to the body, I wanted to give the sides a quick wipe down with some Novas to remove any fingerprints. Again, a tiny bit of Zap-A-Gap is used to glue the Nerf bars on. You only get one shot doing it this way, so make sure you're ready. I begin with the back 2 holes and then work my way forward. Same process for the left side. Again, just a small amount of glue is all that is needed. The rear quarter panel bumpers are installed the same way. I first glue them to the fender and then add a tiny bit of super glue to the rear bumper to hold them in place. The last body panel to be added is the rear filler panel. I'll use some strips of Tamiya masking tape to hold this in place. Once I'm happy with the alignment to the rear fenders, I'll add some super glue from the inside. The clear rear spoiler was masked off and sprayed with some Tamiya mica silver. To hold it in place, we use some diamond glazed water-based glue. This glue dries clear and is water soluble, but it dries with an incredibly strong bond. The clear A-pillar can be installed next using the same glue. Now we can really make this thing look like a race car. Begin by gluing on the front tires first. Once again, green Zap-A-Gap is used to hold these in place. You'll notice these are the tires that have Hoosier on both sides. Once these are firmly in place, the rear tires can be added next. With the tires and wheels fully dried, now I can add the front windscreen using again Testor's Window Maker glue. I'm using the kit glass here, but this could also be replaced with clear sheet plastic if you'd like something thinner. One last touch I wanted to add was to replace the hood pins we had sanded off in part 1. Using Protex Photo Etch hood pins and Testor's Window Maker glue, the 4 hood pins can be installed. A small dot of glue is all that is needed, and then these can be set into place. With the hood installed and the chrome air cleaner from the Showboater kit, our Wes's Model Car Corner Zack Knowlden No. 4 Modified is complete.